Welcome to Wadsworth AI, the podcast at the intersection of humans and artificial intelligence. Here, we explore how AI is reshaping business, society, and our everyday lives, and how we can build advantage responsibly, ethically, and sustainably. Before we begin, I want to be clear. The views shared in this podcast are entirely my own and do not represent the opinions of any company I have worked for in the past, work for currently, or may work for in the future. AI is moving fast. We won't get everything right, but we will learn together, question together, and stay vigilant as we shape this next frontier of humanity. Let's begin.
Hey everybody, this is Noel Pennington, and sort of our first podcast with an actual guest. I have the opportunity in the past to work with Steve. Steve, you're amazing. You've done an amazing job at one of our partners that we did a lot of work with, which was AiFi. So I wanted to start first with who you are and what you've done in the past, and really kind of reflect in your work and journey with AiFi, which was really kind of focused in on more of the traditional AI piece, where you basically were doing a bunch of machine learning and computer vision from a standpoint of the frictionless shopping piece. And I'd like to take a minute to come back to that, because one of the things that you and I talked about maybe 10 days ago was talking about sort of like Amazon leaving that sort of space and how you're sort of seeing that space from an AI perspective. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you and just kind of get your thoughts.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. This is fun. I'm honored to be the first of your invited guests. So yeah, AiFi, the way to think about AiFi was we track people and objects through space. And it's interesting, if any of the listeners are gamers, you might know that big games are built on top of engines. And these engines basically dictate things like the physics of the game and where the light sources are and how things accelerate or stop, or et cetera. And so the game designers don't have to start from scratch every time. And so we kind of thought of ourselves as the game engine for physical spaces. And the first game that we built was called Cashierless Checkout. But it's not the only thing that AiFi can do, and that's germane as we get back to the notion of what Amazon did or didn't do right about how they approach the problem. So in that sense, AiFi was a lot of fun to run. We worked a lot with global retailers around the world, but we also worked in spaces that weren't specifically retail, that weren't about getting a receipt at the end of the day. It was more about understanding maybe how people move through the space and where they dwelled, so that you could start to track down things like efficiency and effectiveness. And it created a digital twin. So you had an opportunity to really understand a lot of analytics about the space. So for example, Noel walked into a space, he saw an advertisement. Did he actually do anything because he saw the advertisement? Did he go to that product? Did he pick it up? Did he buy it? That's attribution in a physical space that never existed. So those are the kinds of things that AiFi was really driving at. It was a lot of fun to work with, and it was a lot of fun to work with you all at Microsoft and have the support that you all gave us.
Yeah, well, it was really interesting because, you are seeing a shift, right? I think there was an article written recently. They're talking about sort of Amazon and sort of their shift in strategy from a standpoint of going out of the frictionless shopping piece. In fact, aren't they closing a lot of their stores now, or maybe all their stores? And I know that they have a commercial model that they worked with from a retail perspective, right? But we're seeing acceleration, of course, with AiFi. I mean, the work that they've done with Zabka and just all the stores that they have there. What do you think about from a shift perspective, from an Amazon perspective, but also how we should be thinking that from a standpoint of AI? And does frictionless shopping, is it sort of gone, right? Should retailers be thinking about it more, or things along those lines?
Well, I think what it really highlights is the difference in how you approach solving a problem. So if you actually pull back the cover and look at the two companies, what Amazon did was they said, we need to generate a receipt. So if we're going to do that, how do we do it? And so they put weight sensors on the shelf. They put pretty expensive cameras, three-dimensional cameras in the ceiling. And they constantly had to make certain that every item stayed where it was supposed to be, because again, weight sensors.
Yep.
So they kind of over-engineered it, all with the idea of how do you generate a receipt. Whereas what AiFi did was we started with, how do we understand how people and objects move through space, and then we'll put business logic on top of that. And so in that case, generating receipt is no different than doing analytics, is no different than doing anything else that we might do. And so consequently, we spent quite a bit less money than they did. I believe if you were to go out and look, they spent north of $5 billion trying to generate their program. And ultimately, it was too difficult to get the unit economics to work. And that's why they've pulled out of primarily grocery. They're still in retail. They're still in concession stands, for example. And that makes sense because if you stop and think about the unit economics, the concession stand has very high value items. A beer might be $15, for example, and
Right.
there's lots of margin. There's lots of margin in that. So
Oh, sure.
you can charge what you need to charge to make money. And by the way, you're adding benefit because it's about throughput. Whereas
Yeah.
a grocery is certainly to some degree about throughput, but it's really about labor savings and value proposition to the shopper. And it's also a very low margin place. They don't have 20 or 30 cents per item for you to charge them to do frictionless checkout. So if you can't get down to low single digit pennies, it's never going to work.
Yeah, got
And
it. That makes
Amazon couldn't get down there. So that's why they've exited that part of the space. But iFi can, which is
yeah.
why they are actually expanding into grocery now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Steve, first of all, I know that you've kind of moved on from that perspective, and it was really great because I learned something new. I learned a little bit about, when we connected again and talked a little bit, it was the title of, what was the title from where you are now? It's residence or executive in
Executive
residence.
in residence, venture
Yeah.
partner, executive in residence. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't really understood what that was, but I guess it is the title from a standpoint of being the Uber CEO, from a standpoint of really helping organizations transform from that startup into that mature organization, right? And I think it's been really interesting seeing so many companies or people are entering this AI space, not only in retail but across those pieces. And first of all, I think you're an amazing, sort of CEO looking at the operational side and really operationalizing how we should think about this and turning it away from just a shiny object into an actual implementation that's sustainable from a standpoint of those startups. And I think a lot of startups miss that kind of capability. So I'm going to shamelessly plug the fact that I know that you're great from that perspective. So if anybody's interested, they can, of course, reach out to you, and potentially you're available because of that residence and status. So I thought I'd just kind of shamelessly plug that. But, because I think you had that ability to really drive opportunities there. So Steve, just thought I'd give you a little space to talk about that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks. So you're correct. I'm a venture partner with a venture firm in Palo Alto, and that's a pretty normal concept for these firms that are investing large quantities of money. They want to shepherd the money with some support. And so I am a resource for our portfolio companies to use to help them focus their strategy and then help them build the plans and foundation to scale. So a lot of times you'll find, especially younger stage companies, they have spent most of their time on the product and making certain that the technology works, which they should.
Yep.
And then they get to a point where they now need to go out into the marketplace, and maybe they get some pilots and they get some things going, but eventually things start to speed up. And what they find is they don't have the foundation that they need in order to scale. And that's problematic because under scale, your foundation will crumble if you don't have the right sort of things in place. Example being accounting, ERP systems, right? The ability to deal with customers after you've made the sale, marketing. All of those things seem somewhat banal early on, but eventually they come back and rule the roost if you're not careful. So what I do, given my background as an operator over the last, we won't name how many years, is just to add the experience that I had across companies like Procter & Gamble and Energizer and Ubisoft and Facebook, and bring those to these customers or clients or portfolio companies in order to help them really refine their go-to-market strategies so that they're a little bit more successful.
Yeah, got it. Well, if I'm a retailer or anybody from an industry perspective, I mean, everybody is looking at these shiny objects from a CEO, from chatbots all the way to, from a retail perspective, all the way through the conversational commerce, and really kind of driving AI to help from a standpoint of increasing basket size and increasing the ability to build a better customer sort of sat for their users. And so from that perspective, if I'm a CEO, there are lots of things that I was thinking about from that perspective. One is, the strategy behind it. Am I building just an instance where, hey, I'm doing some experimentation, but am I really driving the strategy within my organization to really allow for that next generation of whatever that is, commerce, capabilities, supply chain. So I know you have great experience from a CEO perspective. If I'm a CEO thinking about AI, given the fact there's so much out there talking about this, what are the couple of things that you think are important as you think about it and incorporating it into both your enterprise, into maybe your small business, or even as a person?
Yeah, so maybe let's think about this as sort of what are CEOs doing right and what are they kind of doing wrong.
Yeah.
Um, let's start with the wrong. I think one thing is confusion around data readiness. And you guys,
Yeah.
at Microsoft see this a lot. Like they aren't fully ready to inculcate these AIs because their data isn't set up, it isn't prepared the right way, it isn't ready for these tools to be unleashed on them. And so that would be the first thing. And so they really need to work with their CTOs or bring somebody in to really help them get the data aligned. The second is sort of that demo versus reality gap. I think sometimes uh, CEOs see a demo for 30 minutes and think that it's ready, and so they can just bring it in, and it's not ready. Especially if they're working with younger companies. Um, it might be ready in certain instances and certain very narrow scoped use cases, but it isn't necessarily ready for what that particular CEO needs. And so they really need to be able to vet that and slow things down and be ready to get that prepared in the right way. Now, the sort of the reverse of that is the pilot purgatory, and this is where you and I have banged our heads so many times with your partner companies and the end client that we were working with, in particular retail, which is too many organizations just get stuck in this endless proof of concept.
Yeah.
And they bring something in for 90 days and maybe they didn't even pay for it. And so they have no vested interest in this thing being successful. And after 90 days, it's still sitting on the shelf. And that's pretty much a guarantee that it's not going to go anywhere. And the corollary to that is, or they throw it into their new tech group or their innovation team, and that's often where innovation goes to die. And so they really need to have a much better strategy on these notions of pilots. And then maybe the final thing would be sort of governance as an afterthought, like
Yeah.
not building in the right governance up front and really think about the ethics and the compliance and the security sort of before they put everything in place. And so I think people are getting better at that, but that's certainly something I would point out. So what are they getting right? Well, the better CEOs are really focusing on strategic alignment over hype, and so they're
Mhm.
really tying the results of the AI to concrete KPIs and having their leaders underneath them really focus their teams on delivering that. And if they can't deliver that, either shedding it or if you will, pivoting. Um, Personal fluency, I think, is important too. It's really easy as a CEO sitting at the top of the organization who has a vast, wide array of topics that they have to deal with every day, not really understanding how this stuff works. So I think the better CEOs are really becoming personally fluent in using some of these tools. Um, and then workforce readiness. And again, this is, I think, something that Microsoft does a good job on because you spend a lot of time trying to train and teach what these tools really do. Having a clear understanding that AI isn't just about automation; it's really about augmentation. And
Yeah.
how do I give a tool to Steve or Noel and augment their day to day so that they don't feel like they're being encroached upon, but they also sort of understand that they can 3x, 4x, 10x their daily output, and that adds a lot of opportunity and capacity to the organization to go after new things and drive more revenue and more clients, et cetera. So pause there.
No, that's some really great insight, and I think touching on the data side is really important. I saw an interesting chart that talked about sort of like crap data plus AI makes it sparkling crap, sort of result sets.
Right.
And I think the issue has always been there for years. I remember years ago, I did some work with Cognizant, and we were going out and spending time trying to basically go through and really make a sense of three different MDM systems, right? And so a customer would be one MDM system one way and another one a different way, and third, it would be such a mess because you're basically trying to go out and figure out which was the real truth of data from that perspective. And I think the problem has been it is amplified that with AI, right? Because you think, okay, I have some amazing content that's available to me, but the minute that I basically go out and try to do that work, it doesn't allow me to do that. So I think amplifying that data piece is really important. And I think a lot of people think, oh, AI can help me fix that. No, there's lots of issues, and then we can spend some time later maybe talking through that at a later. But there are lots. I agree with you. Lots of things to that. One of the things that you touched on that I think was really interesting was talking about sort of like the human aspect of AI, right? From a standpoint of how am I using it for myself. So I'm on my own journey, right? I started Open Claw. I've been doing some interesting things there. But I think there's fear that occurs, right? So it was interesting. I was talking to one of my friends, and they were talking about the Waymo, right? And they don't trust the Waymo because it's which I thought was really interesting because they're a tech person, and I was like, how can you not? That's part of what you should consider. I love it, right? Because I didn't feel like I had to tip the Waymo, so which was made it a little cheaper, but it was an amazing experience. And so, first of all, how do you kind of work through that fear that's occurring in the enterprises, small businesses, even personally? I think one of the biggest issues we're seeing, of course, is literacy from an AI perspective. People sort of go to those buzzwords, LLM, and these agentic AI pieces. But how, as a CEO, especially in the fact that one of the things we are seeing is the emergence of these digital agents that potentially are going to take many jobs away for a lot of people. How should we consider that as a CEO, and how do I make sure that fear doesn't exist within my enterprise? So again, I can go through and think about it from a standpoint of making sure my guardrails are correct, making sure that I have trust and capabilities within my AI.
Yeah, look, I think the term AI has been really generalized almost to its detriment. When we are talking about AI, we're talking everything from spell check to your Spotify playlist that's being generated, right? To your phone being able to listen to you and take notes. Probably what's happening on this very podcast. There's probably some AI involved. So I think it's important that the CEOs start to really clarify what it is they're trying to do when it's in relationship to AI. So if I'm establishing an AI tool within a warehouse in order to track inventory better, that's very different than using ChatGPT to help write memos or emails for the team that's in the headquarters. It's not the same AI now. It is AI, and so in that sense, I think you go back to your leadership models, and there's the notion of encouraging the heart and modeling the way. And I think that it really is important that the CEOs start to do that and lead. Right? I mean, a lot of what we're talking about is a leadership challenge more so than really a tool installation problem. And so I think that the CEOs need to be open and transparent about what they're trying to do, the impact that it's going to have. They need to help and train the workforce as need be, whether that's the warehouse team using these robots or these tools, or whether it's the headquarters staff trying to 10x their output, or the coding team for that matter. But I also think the flip side of that is you need to exit the resistors. And the problem that we see a lot of times, well before AI, was as tools came in, people would resist using them. And so, the reality is if you can change and adapt with the company, then you're going to have a place. And if you choose not to, then we're going to offer you a generous severance and thank you so much for your service and move on. And that's the reality of the business world. That has never been different. So we shouldn't just point to AI and say all of a sudden this is different. So I just think that you're really seeing another push against CEOs' leadership ethos and skill sets. And it's an important inflection point for a lot of these organizations, and we're going to see who the CEOs are that can manage that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, I think the human aspect's really important and sort of occasionally gets overlooked. And I don't say overlooked. It's like, we're trying to build these kind of capability. And a lot of times it's interesting because of the people that don't want to leverage it. I get a chance to, so I'm on the board for a high school, and I get to talk to a bunch of ninth graders. And it's really interesting listening to them talk about their kind of capabilities and sort of going, you need to latch on to this kind of capability because the train has left the station. AI is out. And a lot of people are talking about we're sort of building God, right? We're building this capability, this superhuman capability that has never existed before, right? And how do we control this effectively? And how do we get the fear out of this? And, how do we make sure that at the end of the day, we're responsible about it, we're doing it, and we're figuring out how to better society with AI as opposed to destroying it, right? You get many people that talk about sort of Skynet, and I mean, it is scary, right? You see some of these AI stories that are just, I was reading someplace where, an AI bot basically went in and decided to delete all the code from a coder because they thought they got it wrong. And it's really just amazing to do that. But I've seen instances where, one of the things that was really interesting, I called a pizza shop when I was on vacation in Florida, and they were using a chat bot to basically take my order. And I was like, here's a small business really incorporating kind of the capabilities here, which is really interesting. But I want to touch on, we're both parents, right? And so I do worry about sort of AI directionally from a standpoint of in 10 years, how that is going to affect my daughter, right? I have a daughter that's going out and wanting to become a film editor and director. I have a daughter that's sort of worked in healthcare, and she's looking at opportunities there. How should we be talking to our children about it? And how are you talking to your child about it? And are they incorporating it? Are they afraid of it? What are you hearing out there?
Yeah. There's also a notion of sort of jobs that you hit on, and I think everyone needs to just take a breath and just remember that these cycles come all the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the one that's always cited, and I used it when I was running SoftBank Robotics, and everyone was worried about robots taking jobs, was the economy was 80% farming back in the turn of the century, 1800s to 1900s. Now it's like 2%.
Yeah.
Obviously the farmers found jobs, right? Now it was painful in certain instances for sure. Of course it was. But, before electricity, there were no electricians. So the reality is we will adapt and change. And the jobs that we're talking about now are more often than not white collar jobs. And I just think, you and I as white collar workers are far more likely to be able to adapt.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of ways, it's a good that it's focusing more on well-educated, people that have connections and networks that can help them sort of learn and grow. Now, taking it back to our kids, I have a daughter at a school on the East Coast. It's considered an elite school, and I asked her if they were doing much with AI, and she said, no, we're not allowed to use AI. That was her answer. And I said, well, that's the wrong answer. I get that you aren't using it to write your paper, and I agree with that. You need to learn how to write. However, everything else you're doing, you should be using AI. You should be writing your resume for different internships that you're applying to. You should be writing cover letters with it. You should be using it to build spreadsheets for your budget, for whatever. Like, you should be using it as often as you can, and you should be talking about it with your professors. Maybe not in the classroom, like you're not trying to distract the conversation, but maybe afterwards you get a group together and you have a conversation about what is it, where is it going. I just think the more you talk about, the more you put it at the forefront, the better able you're going to be. And then the sort of the key piece will be, it's probably not so much that your daughter is literally the one holding the camera and getting the angle. It's that she needs to understand that when she gets the film back from the AI, was it done well, or do we need to redo it? Because the AI is just looking for patterns and trying to replicate those patterns. And so for that particular story that she's trying to tell at that moment in time, that may not be the right camera view. So she has to have the wherewithal and the training to edit, if you will, to correct, if you will, what the AI is doing. And the same is true in coding. The reality is, you're right, you don't need maybe a 23-year-old coder anymore, but you need somebody to evaluate the code that comes back. And you don't necessarily need somebody to write the white paper themselves. They need to be able to read the white paper that the AI delivered and say, yes, it actually made the points in the way that we wanted to make it, in the positioning the way we wanted to position it, or not. And so those are now becoming the skill sets, I think, that are more important. is can you evaluate what the AI is delivering to you so that you can then either utilize it or edit it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the key learnings I'd give my kids is, make certain that you develop the skills well enough to understand the output of these systems and whether or not they're good enough.
Got it. Well, it's interesting, especially from a standpoint of thinking where direction we're going and the new frontier that's existing, especially from talking to where, some people should consider they're entering the job market. And one of the things that was interesting when we were talking was about the robotics piece. Like, where does robotics really sit? Like, if I have a robot sitting in my store doing fulfillment or doing things from a standpoint of logistically working in the warehouses, who controls that, right? And I think that's going to be really interesting to see this new frontier that we didn't have to worry about as much, right? Is the robot getting it right? Did it do the right things? Who controls that? Is it supply chain information? Is it person? Is it I don't know, is it HR or like where does that really sit? And so how do we think about those? And I think that was an interesting point you brought up was sort of like it's going to open up some interesting frontiers that we didn't have before. And any thoughts of what they need to be considering as they think about things like actual robots going and doing actual work in the stores and in the warehouses?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, sort of back to the notion of work. Again, before there were computers, there were no coders. Before there were robots, there were no roboticists or nobody in charge of maintaining the robots, of making certain they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. So I think what you're going to find is some of this automation, some of this technology necessarily brings with it new jobs.
Yeah.
And so just we got to remember the flip side of the coin too. So back to your question about utilizing that kind of technology in these spaces. The typical problem is these are locations that are operationally already, if you will, Kaizened down to, as I like to say, the gnat's ass.
Yeah.
So in other words, every operational thing they're doing has been vetted and retried and redone until they are fairly certain it is as efficient as possible. So they are typically reticent to allow technology in that somehow upsets the apple cart or has an opportunity to really take their metrics away, meaning their efficiency, their effectiveness, their sales per square foot, their inventory accuracy, or whatever. And so on one hand, you understand that. That is the reality of their world. Wall Street measures them on things like same-store sales. And so if you mess up their same-store sales because you've just implemented a chain-wide technology that brought their sales down 5%, that's a problem. So totally understand that. That said, the reality is this technology is ready. It's ready now.
Yeah.
And so, if you don't have a robot going up and down the store aisles checking your inventory like Simbi Robotics does, I guess my question to you is why aren't you doing that?
Yeah.
Because they've proven over the last 10 years that they can do it. And it's way better than anybody going out there to check it themselves because they aren't distracted. They don't get people asking them questions. They aren't flipping through their phone for the next TikTok video. And by the way, they want to be there. And so, I guess the question becomes, if you're not using it, why aren't you using it? Because it's super simple, and it just makes your entire operation that much better. And so, to some degree, it's about the courage of the CEO and the leadership team deciding that it's time, that they need to move forward, and they can do it in a smart way. But I'll give you the contrast. I've worked in retail and technology for quite some time, and I can think of a specific instance where the retailer had our solution for about 5 years and made it from one store to 2 stores in 5 years.
Wow.
And I've just got to say, like, that is way too long. Like, if you can't get the gumption up to go use the tool that is providing you not only efficiency and effectiveness, but analytics that you've never had before, then I guess the question isn't so much is the technology ready, it's is the leadership team ready to actually embrace their job and go drive things. So at any rate, there's lots of reasons why technology stalls, and it's usually champions or disappear or what have you. But I think, especially in retail and in the supply chain that supports retail, so think warehousing, You have a consistent labor problem. I think we always talk about jobs being lost, but we don't often talk about the jobs that people don't want.
Yeah.
Typically, when you and I were growing up, the person working in a retail store was age, say, 18 to 25, 26. 18 to 26-year-olds do not want those jobs these days, which is
Yep.
why the turnover rate and the open job rate is so high in retail. And by the way, it's a stressful job. Like the Bureau of Labor Statistics will say it's one of the most stressful jobs out there, certainly as an hourly employee. So let's call a spade and
Yeah.
agree that you're not taking jobs, you're filling work streams that people don't want. And so the people that do want to work there can focus on higher value added activity. So anyway, I'll
Yeah.
stop the diatribe, but
No, look, I think, Steve, one, you always have some great viewpoints on this. And what I'd like to do is come back to you, every so often so we can talk about just the pace of change with AI. I mean, I always think about Moore's Law and the fact that, transistors doubled its capabilities every 18 months to 2 years, which really sped the innovation, but that was every 2 years, right? You'd see a better processor capabilities. It feels like with AI, it's more like, it goes down from 2 years to 2 minutes is almost what it feels like, just how quickly that's done. So, Steve, if you don't mind, what I'll have to do is I'll come back to you, occasionally, and we can talk more about sort of what you're seeing out there. Because at a C level, I think it's important for our leadership, people within those leadership positions to understand the impacts within the organization and move away from the shiny objects and figure out how to operationalize AI to make it more efficient and capable, and make sure they have the right guardrails up, make sure that the human is sort of considered from a standpoint of how that's going to affect them, make sure the literacy's there. So, Steve, one, I want to thank you for the opportunity to spend time talking to you. It's always great to kind of see that. Next time, maybe I'll get you to jam on the guitar a little bit. We can
let's
do a
not do
little.
No, it's so fun to hang out with you, buddy, and I'm happy for your new podcast, and thank you for allowing me to be your first guest.
Oh no, I'm so excited, and if there's questions, Steve, people can reach out to you. I'll post your LinkedIn profile in the description of this podcast. And if people are interested to talk to you more about sort of like how they consider AI, any way that they should get in contact with you.
You can do it that way, or Kebek Ventures is my personal LLC. They can go through the website and it'll ping me. So it's
Okay.
Kebek Ventures.com.
Okay, and I'll post it. I'll share email addresses and we'll reach out to you. Steve, again, thank you so much. It's always great talking to you, and I'm just excited to revisit this conversation in the next couple of months and figure out sort of where we are with that. Okay.
All right, buddy. Be well.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. You take care, and we'll talk soon. So as we say, that's a wrap. Our first podcast is completed, and it has been a monumental effort to get to this point. We're so excited to share ideas with you as we take this AI journey together. There's so many things that we need to be considering from a human aspect, and we're going to explore this over the next several podcasts and really talk about how we should be thinking about this, not only from a business perspective, but from a personal perspective. How this is going to change our lives, how this is going to change our children's lives, and what should we be considering. So hopefully you'll stay tuned in and see where we go with this. I'm so excited to share this with you. If you'd like to learn more, of course, you can connect to me on LinkedIn. Also, I write a weekly newsletter where we're talking about AI, not just from a standpoint of tools and hypes, but how we should be considering this from a standpoint of strategy, from a standpoint of governance, from a standpoint of foundation, and especially the human aspect. So stay tuned in for more. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And one of the things I always end my newsletter with is AI doesn't create advantage by default. Advantage comes from how leaders apply it. And I think that's really critical. So let's go out and start figuring out how AI can really help us both in our personal lives and our business life. Everybody have a great day. Thanks for spending the time with us.